In a strict, spotless HOA neighborhood where every lawn was perfect, every smile was fake, and every rule was treated like law, a quiet man named Daniel sat alone in a small cafe parking lot, tapping his fingers nervously on the steering wheel as rain began to dot the windshield, and he kept checking his phone again and again, hoping, waiting, praying for a message from the woman he was supposed to meet tonight. A blind date he had been excited about for weeks, maybe the first spark of happiness in a long, lonely life. He had cleaned his car, ironed his shirt, rehearsed greetings in his head, imagining how the moment might feel, thinking maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But the minutes dragged on, and his excitement slowly turned into anxiety, then disappointment, and finally a hollow ache in his chest as his phone vibrated with a new message. His heart leaped, until he read the words, "Sorry, I can't come." Just 5 words. No explanation. No reason. No chance. His heart sank, heavy and cold, like a small hope collapsing inside him. He leaned back in the seat, staring into the dark, feeling foolish for getting excited, feeling stupid for thinking someone might actually show up, and for a moment he closed his eyes, breathing slowly, trying to swallow the sadness that suddenly filled his throat. The cafe lights flickered above, one buzzing weakly like it was dying, and the whole parking lot felt still, empty, too quiet for a Friday night. Daniel sighed and reached for the keys, ready to start the car and go home to his silent apartment. Another night alone, another broken attempt at connection. He told himself it didn't matter, that he was used to disappointment, that being alone wasn't the worst thing. But deep down he felt a familiar sting, being ignored, being forgotten, being invisible. Just as he turned to put the car in reverse, something caught his eye. A figure sitting on the far side of the lot near an old, beat-up car, barely visible under the dim streetlight. At first he thought it was just someone resting, but then he noticed movement. Someone shaking, shoulders trembling, hands covering their face. He leaned closer, squinting through the rain-specked glass, and his breath stalled when he realized it was a woman. Not just a woman, she was holding 2 small children close to her sides, 2 little kids huddled against her like baby birds seeking warmth. The woman's head was bowed, hair messy and wet, and her body shook like she was crying, really crying, the kind of crying that comes from deep pain. The children looked frightened, their small hands gripping her coat, their faces pale and confused. Daniel blinked, unsure if he was seeing this right. What were they doing here so late? Why were they outside in the cold? And why did the woman look like her world had just fallen apart? He watched her for a moment longer, and even from a distance he could see her lips moving, whispering broken words to the children, over and over, "I tried. I tried." Her voice wasn't angry. It was defeated, exhausted, crushed. The older child, a little girl maybe 7 years old, rubbed her eyes and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear, and the younger one, a boy around 4, leaned into his mother's side, his tiny stomach growling loud enough that even Daniel could feel the hunger behind it. Something inside him tightened, a knot forming in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man who liked to get involved in strangers' problems, but this didn't look like a small problem. This looked like someone whose life had snapped. He glanced at the car they were sitting beside. It was stuffed with bags, clothes, old blankets, packed so full it looked like they had moved their entire life into it. Not neatly, not planned, shoved in desperation. Like they were leaving somewhere fast. Or escaping. A chill crept down Daniel's spine, even though the night wasn't that cold. He knew this neighborhood. HOA rules ran everything. No noise, no messy yards, no unapproved guests. Everyone smiled in daylight and judged in the dark. People didn't cry in public here. People didn't show pain. People certainly didn't sit in parking lots late at night with children and packed cars. Something was very wrong. His gaze lifted to the HOA security lights on the street poles, suddenly flickering weakly, as if reacting to something unseen. The buzzing hum faded. The lot grew quiet. Too quiet. Like the entire street was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to stop. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. His sadness was replaced with a strange sense of alertness, like his instincts were pushing him to pay attention. His eyes moved back to the woman. Her shoulders slumped lower. Her hands covered her face. The children pressed closer. He could see fear in their tiny bodies. Real fear. Fear that shouldn't exist in children that small. He swallowed hard, suddenly unsure whether driving away was even an option anymore. He didn't know this woman, didn't know her story, didn't know why she was here. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. No mother sits in the cold, crying with her kids in a parking lot unless something terrible has happened. He opened his car door slowly, uncertain, his heart beating louder than the rain. The night air felt heavy, thick, electric. He hesitated. Maybe she didn't want help. Maybe she wanted to be left alone. Maybe he was imagining the danger. But when he saw the little boy wipe his face with a tiny trembling hand, he couldn't sit still. He stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath his feet. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The woman didn't look up. She didn't even notice him approaching. She was lost in her own storm. As he got closer, he heard the little girl whisper, "Mommy, I'm hungry," in a voice so soft and broken it nearly shattered him. The woman choked back a sob, brushing the little girl's hair with shaking fingers, whispering, "I know, baby. I know. I'm sorry." And Daniel felt like someone punched him in the chest. Sorry for what? Why apologize to children who were clearly innocent? What had happened to make her feel like she failed them? He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle them. "Excuse me. Are you okay?" His voice came out soft, almost unsure. The woman flinched instantly, like his words were bullets. Her head snapped up, eyes red, cheeks wet with tears. Fear flashed across her face, sharp and immediate, like she expected danger. Not help. Danger. She wrapped her arms tighter around the children, pulling them close as if shielding them. Her breath quickened. Her lips trembled. She looked terrified of him, not because he was threatening, but because she was already living in fear. Deep fear. Daniel raised his hands slightly, palms out, showing he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just saw you were upset." She blinked rapidly, trying to steady her breath, and finally managed to whisper, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother anyone." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, like every word hurt. The little boy buried his face against her, whimpering softly. Daniel shook his head gently, "You're not bothering anyone." But she shook her head back, faster, panicked, whispering, "We shouldn't be here. We're not supposed to be here." The words hit Daniel strangely. Not supposed to be here. Why? Who said that? What did she mean? He crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over them and asked softly, "Do you need help?" Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked around the parking lot, scanning the shadows, scanning the street, scanning the dark windows of the HOA office across the road. Her fear wasn't random. She was looking for something. Or someone. And the way her hands tightened around her children made Daniel's heartbeat spike. She whispered under her breath, almost too quietly to hear, "Please don't find us. Please." Daniel's stomach twisted. Find us. Who was looking for them? Why would anyone be searching for a mother and two small children? His gaze drifted to the car again. Dented, old, backseat piled high with clothes and toys. The trunk tied shut with rope. No car seats. No blankets for warmth. They weren't traveling. They were running. Then he noticed something else. An eviction notice taped to a box in the backseat. His breath hitched. Eviction. Homeless. Children. Fear. The HOA lights flickered again, and this time they buzzed loudly, then dimmed, leaving only a cold pale glow over the parking lot. The whole street felt eerie, unnatural, like the neighborhood itself didn't want them there. The woman's shoulders shook harder. The children clung tighter. Daniel swallowed, voice softer now. "Are you in danger?" The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment she couldn't speak, her throat locked by panic. Then, in a trembling whisper, she said 4 words that sent a cold shiver down his spine. "They told us to leave." Daniel frowned. "Who?" She swallowed hard, lips trembling. "The HOA." His heart froze. The HOA? This neighborhood? This community that claimed to be safe, perfect, good? Why would they tell a mother with children to leave? Why would they force them into the night? He stared at her, stunned, confused, unsettled. Why? What happened? The woman looked down at her children, her voice barely a breath. They said we're not allowed. Her words broke apart, shattered by pain. Not allowed. Daniel couldn't understand. Not allowed because of what? She hesitated, shaking her head, eyes filling again, and whispered in a voice full of shame and fear, because I'm a single mother. Daniel blinked in disbelief. That couldn't be real. That couldn't be a rule. That couldn't be allowed. But the fear in her face wasn't fake. The tears weren't fake. The trembling children weren't fake. Something dark was happening here. Something cruel. Something hidden behind perfect lawns and smiling neighbors. The woman looked back toward the HOA building, eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "If they see us, they'll take everything." The children whimpered softly. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Take everything? What did that mean? What could be worse than this? The rain began to fall harder, cold drops splashing against the pavement, and the wind rustled through the trees like a warning. The neighborhood grew quieter, as if watching them, as if listening. Daniel felt a strange heaviness in the air, like the night itself was shifting, like a story was beginning that he didn't choose, but couldn't walk away from that. He looked at the woman and her children, so vulnerable, so scared, so alone, and in that moment, his broken heart over a cancelled blind date suddenly felt small, unimportant, meaningless compared to the terror sitting in front of him. He realized that the woman who cancelled on him was sitting right there, crying, running, hiding, with her children. His cancelled date wasn't someone who changed her mind. She was someone who was fighting for survival. And as thunder rolled across the dark sky, Daniel understood one chilling truth. This night was not a coincidence. This woman did not appear by accident. Her fear was real. Her children were in danger. And whatever the HOA was hiding, Daniel stood there in the rain, heart thumping hard, staring at the woman and her two shaking children, and even though he didn't know her name yet, he could feel her fear like cold air on his skin, and he knew this wasn't just sadness or stress. This was danger, real danger. The kind that makes a person look over their shoulder every few seconds. The kind that steals sleep and hope. And he gently asked again, voice soft, "What happened? Why did they tell you to leave?" And the woman swallowed, lips trembling, eyes red and swollen, and finally whispered, "My name is Zoe." Like saying her own name cost her strength, and she pulled her children closer as if someone might snatch them from her arms. And Daniel could see how tiny they were, how hungry, how exhausted, their clothes wrinkled and dirty, their faces pale from cold, and he felt a surge of anger at whoever did this to them, because no child should ever look this scared. Zoe wiped her face with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming, mixing with the rain until her cheeks were soaked, and she whispered, "We moved here today. We were supposed to start over," her voice cracking on the word start. Like she once had dreams, but they were crushed before they could begin, and she dug into her coat pocket with shaking fingers, pulling out a folded rental agreement, wrinkled and damp, and she held it out to Daniel like proof she once believed she belonged. Somewhere, whispering, "I signed everything. I paid everything. This was our home." And Daniel took the paper gently, scanning it in disbelief. Her name, the address, the deposit, all approved, all stamped, all official, and he frowned deeply, confused. So why did they tell you to leave? And Zoe let out a shaky breath, the kind someone makes right before they break, and whispered, "Because I'm alone. Because I don't have a husband. Because they said single mothers don't fit their community image." Her voice cracked into a sob, her shoulders shaking violently, and the little girl rubbed her mother's arm, whispering, "Mommy, don't cry," which only made her cry harder, whispering back, "I'm sorry. I'm trying. I'm trying." Daniel felt his chest tighten painfully because he could hear the shame in her voice, shame she didn't deserve, and he shook his head, anger rising in him. "They can't do that. They can't just kick you out because of that." But Zoe laughed softly, a broken, hopeless laugh, whispering, "They did." She looked around the empty street like she expected someone to appear from the shadows, someone she feared, someone she knew, and she whispered, "They told me to be gone by sunset, or else." Daniel froze, the words piercing through him like ice. "Or else what?" he asked, voice tense. Zoe hugged the children tightly, her voice turning into a whisper shaking with terror. They said, if I didn't leave, they would take my kids. Daniel felt his breath stop. Take her kids. Those words didn't sound like a threat from a neighbor or a cruel comment. They sounded like a warning with power behind it, real power. Who said that? Daniel asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Zoe's eyes darted toward an HOA sign across the street, glowing dimly under flickering lights, and she whispered, a man from the HOA board. He came to the house before we even unpacked. He looked at me like I was trash. He said families like mine ruin the neighborhood reputation and that children without a father don't belong here. Her words hit Daniel so hard he clenched his fists without realizing it, fury boiling in his chest, because the cruelty wasn't just disrespect. It was targeted, ugly, intentional. She continued, her voice trembling faster. I told him I paid for the house. I begged him to let me stay. I told him I needed this, that my kids needed this. And he leaned close to me and whispered, leave quietly, or we'll handle it. She looked down at her children, her voice now a thin thread of fear. I didn't know what that meant. And then one of the guards looked at my kids, and smiled. Daniel felt chills run through him, deep and sharp, and the little girl pressed her face into Zoe's shoulder, whispering, Mommy, I'm scared. I don't want them to take us. And Zoe broke again, shaking her head, whispering fiercely, I won't let them. I won't let anyone take you. And Daniel saw a mother fighting the whole world with nothing but her love. He kneeled closer, lowering his voice. Did you call the police? Zoe let out a bitter, hopeless sigh. They said it was a private community issue. They told me if the HOA said we violated rules, they can remove us. Daniel felt his stomach twist. But you didn't violate anything. Zoe nodded, crying harder. But they don't care. She looked at her car, full of rushed belongings, and whispered, I packed up everything as fast as I could. I grabbed whatever I could carry. I didn't even have time to feed them. We drove out. I didn't know where to go. Her voice faltered, and she whispered the raw truth. I have nowhere. No family. No friends. No money left. This was supposed to be our safe place. Daniel stared at her, stunned, shaken, devastated for her, and he couldn't stop thinking about those words, safe place, and how they turned into a nightmare instead. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Zoe flinched, holding her children closer, whispering, I thought if I could just get far enough away, maybe they'd leave us alone. But, her voice dropped to a trembling whisper, I think they followed us. Daniel's pulse spiked. Followed. What do you mean? He asked urgently. Zoe wiped her face, trembling harder now. On the way here, I saw the same SUV behind us twice. No plates, dark windows. It slowed down every time I did, and when I stopped here, it passed slowly. The little boy whimpered, his tiny voice shaking. Mommy, the man in the window looked at me. And Zoe shushed him quickly, fear flooding her face. Daniel felt fear crawl up his spine too, not just sympathy. Fear that something bigger, darker was happening, something beyond HOA rules. He took a slow breath and asked gently, Why did you cancel the date? Zoe looked at him with broken eyes, whispering, I didn't want you involved. I didn't want anyone hurt, and I didn't want my kids to see me cry. And her voice shattered into a sob. But I couldn't leave. I didn't know where else to go. And I thought this parking lot was safe. Just for a few minutes, just to breathe. Daniel's heart broke in a way he had never felt before. She wasn't just a cancelled date. She was a mother running for her children's lives. He glanced once more at the HOA lights. They flickered again, buzzing low, like a warning or a threat. The street felt colder. The shadows felt heavier. And his instincts screamed that something was watching, something waiting. That he swallowed hard and whispered, You're safe with me. But Zoe shook her head instantly, eyes wide with terror. No, no one is safe if the HOA is involved. And she looked around frantically, whispering, If they find us here, they won't let us leave again. The words froze Daniel's blood. The rain started pouring harder, drumming on the pavement like a heartbeat. And the little boy cried softly, his voice shaking, Mommy, I'm hungry. I'm scared. And Zoe broke completely, hugging both children tightly. whispering over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm trying." Daniel's throat tightened painfully. He looked at the empty cafe, the silent street, the flickering lights, and he knew walking away wasn't an option anymore. He couldn't leave them here. He couldn't pretend he didn't see. He couldn't ignore the fear in those children's eyes. Something inside him shifted, awakening a courage he didn't know he had, and he whispered firmly, "Come with me. We'll figure this out." Zoe looked up, stunned, terrified, hopeful, broken, whispering, Why would you help us?" Daniel met her eyes, voice quiet but certain, because no one should fight alone. But deep in his chest, one truth echoed like thunder. He wasn't just helping a stranger, he was stepping into a war he didn't understand. Rain poured harder now, bouncing off the pavement like thousands of sharp needles, and Daniel gently guided Zoe and her children toward his car, opening the back door so the kids could sit inside and escape the cold, and the little girl climbed in slowly, holding her brother's hand, their small bodies shivering from fear and hunger, while Zoe stood beside the open door, frozen, torn between relief and terror, whispering, "If they see us with you, they'll come after you too." But Daniel shook his head, voice steady but soft, "Let them. I'm not letting you stay out here," and something about the certainty in his voice made her eyes fill again, not just with fear now, but with a pain that came from being helped for the first time in a long time, a pain mixed with gratitude, disbelief, and exhaustion. As soon as the children settled into the back seat, they curled into each other, whispering quietly, their stomachs growling, and Zoe's breath shook as she watched them, her face twisting with guilt so deep it looked like it was crushing her from the inside, and she whispered, "They haven't eaten since morning. I told them we'd have dinner in our new home," her voice breaking, "I lied without meaning to." And Daniel's chest tightened so hard it hurt because she wasn't a bad mother. She was a mother who had nothing left but promises she was desperate to keep. He closed the car door gently, like sealing them away from the cold, and turned to Zoe, "We'll go to the HOA office. We'll talk to them. We'll fix this." But the moment he said it, Zoe's face went pale, her body stiffening like he'd spoken a nightmare out loud, and she grabbed his wrist urgently, her fingers cold and trembling, whispering, "No, no, you don't understand. Talking doesn't help. They don't listen. They don't care." But Daniel shook his head, trying to stay calm. There must be someone in charge. Someone reasonable. Someone who can explain. Zoe laughed, a small, broken sound that had no happiness in it, only fear, shaking her head slowly, whispering, "They already explained." She reached into her coat pocket again with shaking hands and pulled out a crumpled envelope, damp from rain and tears, and handed it to Daniel like she was handing over a crime scene. He unfolded it carefully, and the words jumped out in harsh, bold letters. "Application revoked. Not fit for community. Must vacate." Underneath, in red ink, a handwritten sentence. "Single-parent homes not permitted." Daniel felt his breath catch. He looked up at Zoe, stunned, horrified, confused. "They put this in writing." Zoe nodded, tears sliding silently down her face, whispering, "They taped it to the door. Before I even stepped inside." And Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "You never even moved in." She shook her head, voice trembling. "They didn't let me. They stood in the driveway and told me to turn the car around." His stomach twisted violently because this wasn't just unfair. This was cruel, calculated, targeted discrimination. Before he could speak again, headlights flashed across the parking lot, bright, blinding beams sweeping across them like a spotlight searching for prey, and Zoe flinched instinctively, grabbing Daniel's arm, her voice barely a breath, "It's them. I know it. They came back." And Daniel's pulse spiked as a dark SUV rolled slowly down the street. Windows tinted, moving too slowly to be normal, like it was watching, tracking, following. It crept past the cafe, past Daniel's car, not stopping, not speeding up, just gliding like a silent threat. And Zoe's knees nearly buckled as she whispered, "That's the same car, the same one from earlier." Daniel stared at the SUV until it disappeared around the corner, and a chill settled in his bones, heavy and cold, because now he believed her, someone was watching. Someone didn't want her here. Someone didn't want her children here. He turned back to Zoe, voice low and urgent. "This is wrong. Illegal. We need answers. Zoe wrapped her arms around herself, shaking harder, whispering, "The HOA president. Mr. Collins, he told me the community doesn't welcome unstable family structures." Daniel's jaw clenched. Unstable? Because she's alone. Zoe nodded, voice raw. He said kids without a father cause trouble. He said single mothers attract problems. He said the neighborhood must stay clean. The word clean hit Daniel like poison. Clean. Like people could be dirt. Like children could be mistakes. He took a step toward the HOA building across the street. Dark, silent, perfectly polished, standing like a cold guardian of the neighborhood. "We're going there," he said firmly. Zoe shook her head fast, fear exploding across her face. "No. No. Please. He told me if I came back, they'd report me to child services." Daniel froze. Child services. Zoe nodded, eyes brimming with terror, whispering, "He said they'd take the kids. He said single mothers lose custody all the time. He said it would be better if the neighborhood handled it privately." Daniel felt sick. His palms went cold. His breath caught. "He threatened to take your children from you." Zoe nodded again, covering her mouth like she couldn't breathe. "He said I should leave before they make it official." Daniel stared at her, horrified, and finally understood. This wasn't about a rule. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about control. Power. Fear. The HOA wasn't just forcing her out. They were trying to break her, scare her, silence her, and use her children as leverage. He turned his head slowly toward the HOA office again, and he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Security cameras pointed straight at the parking lot, small red dots glowing like watching eyes. Zoe followed his gaze, and her voice dropped to a shaking whisper, "They know we're here." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice low but determined, "Then I'm done hiding." He stepped forward, and Zoe grabbed his arm again, desperate, her voice breaking, "Please, they won't let us leave if they see me. They won't, they'll take them." And she turned to look at her children through the window. Two tiny faces pressed together, eyes closed, breathing softly, unaware of the storm around them. And Zoe whispered, voice trembling with raw terror, "They're all I have." Daniel looked at those sleeping children too. Their innocence, their vulnerability, and something fierce ignited in him, something protective and powerful, and he whispered, "They won't take them. Not while I'm here." Zoe stared at him like she wanted to believe him but didn't know how, whispering, "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Daniel took a slow breath, his voice soft but solid. "Because someone should have helped you long before now." He opened his car door, motioning for Zoe to get inside, but she hesitated, staring at the HOA office across the road, the place that had destroyed her hope in a single day, and she whispered, "If we go back there, everything ends." Daniel met her eyes, rain dripping from his hair, voice steady, "Or everything begins." But deep in his gut, he felt a warning. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation, or a misunderstanding, or an apology waiting to happen. This was a door into something darker, something intentional, something dangerous, and once they stepped into it, Daniel stood there staring at the silent HOA building across the street, rain dripping from his hair, clothes sticking to his skin, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anger, and he knew that if he didn't get answers now, Zoe and her children would disappear into the night with nothing but terror and hunger. And something deep inside him, something he didn't know he had, refused to let that happen. He walked around the car, opened the passenger door gently, and told Zoe to sit inside for a moment to warm up, but she shook her head, gripping the frame of the door like she was holding onto the last piece of solid earth in a collapsing world, whispering, "If I step inside anywhere, it feels like they'll come for me," and her voice trembled so much it sounded like it could break at any second. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his voice soft, "Just stay where the kids can see you. I'll be right outside." She nodded slowly, eyes filled with fear and exhaustion, and she slid into the seat, turning her head immediately to look at the sleeping children in the back like she couldn't breathe unless they were in her sight. Daniel closed the door gently and stepped back into the rain, his hands shaking now, not from cold but from the growing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He felt like the night itself was pushing him toward the HOA building, like the truth was hiding behind those glass doors, waiting, rotting, whispering. He crossed the street, each step echoing like a warning, and when he reached the entrance, he tugged on the handle. Locked. Of course. HOA offices weren't open at night. But he noticed something. Inside the lobby, a dim security light glowed over a wall of old file cabinets, metal drawers lined like tombs holding forgotten stories. His breath caught. Records. Documents. Histories. Maybe answers. He looked around, scanning the dark windows of nearby houses, half expecting someone to step out, to watch, to report him. But the street was eerily still, the storm drowning every whisper. He circled the building, praying for a side entrance, and there, around the corner, an old maintenance door, metal rust creeping along the hinges. He tried the handle. It stuck, then creaked open just enough for him to slip through. His heart pounded as he entered a narrow hallway smelling like dust and disinfectant. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and he froze, breath held, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Only the hum of old lighting and the distant roll of thunder. He moved deeper into the building, passing bulletin boards covered with smiling photos of perfect families. 2 parents, 2 kids, all polished, posed, approved. Not a single-parent household. Not a single mother alone. Not a single father struggling. All staged. All curated. A lie dressed as pride. The old file room was colder than the rest of the building, air stale and heavy like it hadn't been opened in years. He stepped inside, wiping rainwater from his hands, and stared at rows of cabinets labeled with dates. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that Zoe wasn't the first person this had happened to. His gut told him there was a pattern here, something hidden, something intentional. He pulled open a drawer marked Housing Incidents, 5 years ago. Papers rattled. Complaints. Violations. Evictions. Names crossed out. Families removed. He flipped through them quickly, frowning at how many had been marked closed without explanation. Then he froze at a file near the back, thin and creased, marked with red ink, single mother, removed. His heart hammered as he pulled it out. The name on the paper hit him like a punch. Amanda Hayes. A name he didn't recognize, but the note underneath chilled him. 1 adult. 2 children. Unapproved family structure. Escorted off property. Case terminated. Terminated. The word felt wrong. Not resolved. Not completed. Terminated, his breath quickened. He turned the page and found a small, stapled police note. It reported Amanda missing 2 weeks later. Last seen in the same neighborhood. Call marked, no further action. No investigation. No follow-up. Nothing. His hands trembled. Another mother. 2 kids. Forced out. Then disappeared. Just like Zoe could have. Just like Zoe still could. He closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the sick feeling rising in his stomach. This wasn't just a rule. This was history. A history buried beneath smiles and fences and perfect lawns that he turned to leave, gripping the file, but stopped when he noticed another folder shoved behind the drawer, almost hidden. He tugged it out. No label. Just a torn corner. He opened it slowly, and his heart stopped. A blurry photo. A woman standing in front of her car. Crying. Holding 2 children. The same parking lot he'd just been in. The same position. The same fear in her face. The date? 6 months ago. He flipped the photo over. Written in shaky handwriting were 3 words. She begged them. Daniel felt his throat close. He searched the folder. No name. No report. No ending. Just the photo. His mind raced. How many? How many mothers? How many children? How many threats? How many disappeared? He shoved the files under his jacket and hurried back through the hall, back into the storm, pushing open the maintenance door. As he stepped out, lightning flashed violently overhead, and he saw something that froze him. Across the street, near the cafe parking lot, another SUV not moving. Not leaving, just sitting there watching, its headlights off. Windows dark. Engine humming, and the moment Daniel stepped into the open, the SUV flicked its headlights on. 2 blinding beams pointed straight at him, like eyes. Daniel's breath hitched. He turned toward his car. Zoe was standing outside now, rain pouring on her hair, clutching the open door, staring at the SUV with terror so pure it turned her face white. She whispered one trembling sentence that sliced through the storm. "That's the man who threatened me." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. The SUV engine revved. Slowly, the vehicle began to roll forward, tires slicing through puddles, inching closer and closer, like a predator savoring the moment before the attack. Zoe stumbled backward, shielding her children behind her, her voice cracking. "He found us. He found us." The little girl woke up, saw the SUV, and started crying, "Mommy, no. Mommy, no." And Zoe collapsed to her knees, hugging them tightly, whispering, "Don't look, don't look." Daniel's heart thundered. He stepped in front of them without thinking, planting himself between the SUV and the terrified family, rain pouring down his face, clothes plastered to his skin, voice trembling but fierce as he whispered to himself, "Not again. Not this time." Because now he knew the truth. This wasn't an isolated case. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. A system. A hunt, and Zoe was the next target. Unless he fought back. Unless he exposed them. Unless he risked everything. And as the SUV rolled closer, headlights swallowing the night, Daniel understood one terrifying thing. The HOA's darkest secret wasn't the rule. It was the history behind it. A history of single mothers. A history of children. The SUV crept closer through the rain, its engine low and rumbling like something alive, something hungry, and Daniel stood frozen for a split second, heart hammering so hard it hurt, watching the glowing headlights slice through the darkness straight toward him, toward Zoe, toward those trembling children, and he suddenly felt the full weight of what he had just discovered in that file room. This wasn't just a neighborhood issue. This wasn't just a rule. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, a cycle, a trap, and the SUV felt like the final proof that Zoe had been right all along. They were being hunted. He moved quickly, grabbing Zoe's arm and whispering urgently, "Get in the car." And she didn't argue, didn't question. She just reacted with pure terror, scrambling to pull her children into the back seat as fast as she could. Her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the door handle, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The little girl clung to her neck, crying, "Mommy, don't let them take us." And her tiny voice broke something inside Daniel, something deep and protective and furious. He slammed the back door shut and rushed around to the driver's side. But before he could climb in, the SUV stopped. Not far. Not close. Just far enough to watch. Just close enough to threaten. The driver didn't step out. Didn't roll down a window. Didn't move at all. The vehicle sat there like a dark, silent warning. Zoe stared at it through the rain-streaked glass, whispering, "That's him. That's the man who came to the house. The one who told me to leave. The one who said they'd handle it if I didn't." And her voice trembled with a kind of fear that didn't come from imagination. It came from memory. Real memory. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, locking all the doors with a loud click that echoed through the quiet car like a gunshot. The children huddled in the back, eyes wide, small bodies shaking. Zoe reached back, holding their hands tightly, whispering, "It's okay. Mommy's here," but her voice was breaking, and Daniel could hear the truth behind her words. She wasn't okay. She was terrified. He started the car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. "We're going to the HOA office," he said, voice low, controlled. "We're going to confront this." Zoe shook her head violently, tears flooding her eyes again. "No. Daniel, they don't listen. They'll twist everything. They'll call me unstable. They'll take them away. They said they would." But Daniel shook his head, jaw clenched. "Not with me there. Not after what I found." That he slammed his foot on the gas, pulling out of the parking lot. But as he turned toward the HOA building, he saw headlights behind them, 2 sets. The SUV had moved. It was following them. Another car joined behind it. Cold dread shot through his chest. Zoe saw it too, covering her mouth, whispering, "Oh God, oh God. They don't want us to go there. They don't want anyone to know." The rain whipped across the windshield, blurring the road, making everything feel even more suffocating. The neighborhood houses passed by in perfect rows. White fences, trimmed hedges, dark windows, all looking calm, peaceful, normal. Lies. All lies. Because behind those walls, something was rotten. When they reached the HOA office, Daniel pulled into the small parking area and stopped the car, breathing hard. The two cars behind them didn't park. They stayed in the street, engines idling, headlights glowing like eyes in the dark. Watching. Waiting. Zoe clutched her children to her chest. They're waiting for us to make a mistake, she whispered, voice trembling so badly it almost didn't sound like her. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the files he had hidden under his jacket, the proof, the history, the names, and stepped out of the car into the pouring rain. The cold struck him instantly, but he didn't flinch. He walked toward the HOA building, his steps fast and determined, Zoe following close behind, holding her children's hands, their small feet splashing through puddles. When they reached the front door, the security guard inside noticed them. Eyes narrowing, radio lifting to his mouth like he was about to call someone, Daniel banged on the glass. Hard. We need to speak to Mr. Collins, he shouted, rain sliding down his face, voice full of anger and urgency. The guard hesitated, then unlocked the door with a slow, reluctant click. Daniel pushed it open, and Zoe stepped inside with the children, dripping wet, breath shaking. Mr. Collins emerged from the hallway, dressed too perfectly for midnight, hair slicked back, smile stretched thin and fake across his face. I thought we made it clear, he said coldly, staring straight at Zoe, you are not welcome here. Zoe took a step back, instinctively shielding her children behind her. Daniel stepped forward, holding out the file, then explain this. Collins's smile twitched, cracking ever so slightly. Daniel opened the folder, slapping the pages onto the counter. Amanda Hayes. 2 children. Forced removal. Case closed. No further action. Missing. Collins's eyes darkened. That is confidential property, he snapped. Daniel's voice rose, full of fury. You made her disappear. Zoe gasped softly, covering her mouth, while Collins's expression hardened, voice turning cruel. She left. Like she was supposed to. The children whimpered, clutching Zoe's legs. Collins's gaze flicked to them. His smile returned, colder, sharper. Children like these, he said softly, venomously, don't belong in this community. Zoe choked on a sob. The little girl's tiny voice trembled. Why doesn't he like us, Mommy? And then, unexpectedly, the little boy lifted his head, his small voice barely audible, but clear enough to slice through the room like a knife. I saw him, he whispered. Daniel turned. What? The boy pointed at Collins with a shaking hand, tears brimming in his eyes. He's the man who tried to open our car door when Mommy was crying. Silence fell like thunder. Zoe gasped, knees buckling as she grabbed her son, staring at Collins in horror, voice breaking. You tried to take my kids. Collins didn't deny it. His lips curled into a chilling smirk. We were assessing their safety. Mothers like you. Daniel slammed his fist on the counter, rage exploding out of him. You're kidnapping children. Collins's eyes snapped to him, voice low and threatening. Watch your words. Just then, the radio on the guard's belt crackled loudly. A voice on the other end said, Unit 3 and 4 in position. Daniel turned toward the glass doors and saw 4 guards approaching the building. Marching. Closing in. Zoe's breath shattered into panic. Daniel, she whispered, voice cracking. They came for us. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the exit, but Collins's voice echoed after them, cold and calm. You can't run. This community doesn't let mistakes leave. Zoe's children began crying, full, terrified sobs, their tiny bodies shaking uncontrollably, and Zoe clutched them tight, whispering desperately, I won't let them take you. I won't let them. I swear. Daniel looked into Zoe's eyes and saw the truth. She wasn't just scared. She was fighting for their lives, and as the guards reached the door, blocking the exit, rain pounding like war drums outside, Daniel realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about Zoe. This wasn't just about single mothers. This was about control, about power, about taking children. The guards reached the glass doors like a wall of shadows, blocking every inch of escape, rain pouring behind them like a curtain closing on the last bit of hope, and Zoe's breath broke into tiny, shattered gasps. As she pulled her children close, her fingers digging into their coats like she was holding onto life itself, whispering, "Don't look, don't look," while the little boy buried his face in her chest, crying softly, and the little girl clung to her waist with trembling hands, eyes wide and terrified. Daniel stepped in front of them without thinking, his chest rising and falling fast, adrenaline flooding his veins, his voice rough with anger and disbelief as he glared at the guards. "You're not touching them. Do you hear me? You're not touching them." Mr. Collins didn't flinch. He stood behind the counter like a king watching pawns move, his cold smile growing sharper as he slowly walked toward them, every step echoing across the empty lobby, calm and cruel. "This situation," he said softly, "is no longer your concern. The mother violated community rules. Her presence endangers the neighborhood." Daniel shook his head in disgust, rainwater dripping from his hair. "She paid. She signed. She followed every rule. You're the danger." Collins's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in just enough for Daniel to hear the venom behind each word. Strong communities require strong boundaries. Weak families create weak futures. Zoe's knees buckled. She let out a sound that wasn't even a sob, more like a breath collapsing in pain. Daniel grabbed her arm, steadying her, but Collins kept talking, voice low and poisonous. "Children raised without structure often become burdens. Risks. Problems." He tilted his head, looking directly at the children. "We are simply preventing trouble." The little girl whimpered, "Mommy, what does he mean?" Zoe hugged them tighter, choking on her tears. Daniel's rage boiled over. He slammed the file folder on the counter, the pages splattering from rain, the photos and missing reports sliding across the glossy surface. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Amanda Hayes. Where did she go? What did you do to her?" Collins's eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with annoyance, as if this was all tiresome, inconvenient. "She left. Like she was told." Daniel stepped forward, voice rising. "She didn't leave. She disappeared. Just like you wanted Zoe to disappear." Collins's smile froze, the calm slipping for half a second, and in that crack Daniel saw something, fear. The truth was close. The guards moved in, surrounding them, hands on radios, boots squeaking on the wet floor. One reached for Zoe's arm, and she cried out, stumbling back, shielding her children, screaming, "Don't touch them." Her voice was so raw, so full of terror, that even the guards hesitated. Daniel shoved himself between them, pushing the guard's hand away, shouting, "Back off." The guard scowled, stepping closer. "Sir, move aside." Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous low. No, the tension snapped like lightning, and then something unexpected happened. A door opened behind them. The HOA lobby door that led back outside. Someone stepped in. A woman. A neighbor. Then another. Then two more. People holding umbrellas, wearing pajamas, wrapped in coats. Neighbors who had seen the headlights, the guards, the chaos. People who had heard shouting through the rain. People who didn't understand what was happening, but could feel the wrongness in the air. One woman gasped when she saw the children crying. Another whispered, "What's going on?" A man frowned at the guards. "Why are you surrounding a mother?" Collins stiffened. He hadn't expected witnesses. He straightened his jacket, forcing his fake smile back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "there is no cause for alarm. This woman is trespassing on restricted property and—" But a voice cut him off. "Restricted?" A neighbor pointed at Zoe. "She moved in today. I saw her car." Another neighbor nodded. "Yeah, she was unloading boxes." The guards stopped her. Murmurs spread through the group, confusion growing into suspicion. Collins's smile twitched. "She violated community guidelines," he insisted. Someone asked, "What guidelines?" Another added, "Since when are single mothers banned?" The guards shifted uneasily. Zoe lifted her head, tears streaking her face, voice shaking but suddenly louder. "They threatened to take my kids." The crowd gasped. A woman put her hand over her mouth. A man clenched his fists. Collins snapped, "She's lying." But Daniel stepped forward, holding up the file, his voice booming, "Then explain this." He opened the folder so everyone could see the stamped notices, the missing mother, the red ink rule forbidding single parents. Silence fell, thick, heavy. A neighbor whispered, "Oh my God," another said, "Is this real?" Collins's face went pale. He stammered, "These documents are private. Stolen property." He broke into, Daniel cut him off, "I found them. They weren't hidden well enough." A gasp rippled through the group. The guards took a step closer, but now the neighbors moved too, forming a loose circle around Daniel, Zoe, and the children, not touching the guards, but standing in their way, eyes burning with anger. The balance had shifted. Power had shifted. The HOA was no longer in control. And then, another voice spoke. The little girl. Her voice was tiny, fragile, but clear. "He tried to take us." Every head snapped toward her. Collins flinched. The little boy added, sniffling, "He pulled the car door." A neighbor turned to Collins, horrified, "Is that true?" Collins opened his mouth, but nothing came out from outside. Another car door slammed. Sirens. Real ones. Police sirens. Someone in the neighborhood had called for help. For the first time, Collins panicked. "Guards, remove." But he didn't finish. Because the guards didn't move. They looked at the police lights approaching and froze, stuck between loyalty and law. Zoe grabbed her children, holding them tight as tears flooded her face again. But this time the tears weren't just fear. They were relief, shock, disbelief. She whispered, "They can't hide it now. They can't hide it anymore." Daniel stood beside her, shoulders shaking with adrenaline, and for the first time all night, he felt like they weren't alone. The neighbors stood taller, angrier, braver. Someone said loudly, "We want answers." Another shouted, "You can't take children." Collins backed away, face contorted, voice breaking, "You don't understand, this community needs order." But nobody was listening anymore, because the sirens grew louder, because the truth was out, because the neighborhood had finally woken up. And as the police cars turned into the street, lights flashing through the rain, one thing became clear. The HOA wasn't just losing control. Red and blue lights exploded across the rain-soaked street like a sudden storm inside a storm, flashing against windows, fences, and faces as police cars screeched to a halt in front of the HOA building, tires spraying water, doors flying open, and officers stepping out fast, voices sharp, boots splashing through puddles. And for the first time all night, the guards, those cold, stone-faced shadows, looked shaken, stepping back instinctively like prey caught in a spotlight. The neighbors, who had gathered in confusion and fear, now stood taller, voices rising, pointing at Collins, pointing at the guards, pointing at Zoe and her trembling children, shouting, "Help her." They threatened her. They tried to take her kids, and the air was thick with anger, disbelief, and something new, truth. Zoe clutched her children like she was holding onto the last pieces of her heartbeat, tears pouring down her cheeks as she whispered to them over and over, "It's okay. Mommy's here. Mommy's not letting go." Her voice raw, broken, desperate, and the little boy buried his face in her neck, sobbing, "Don't let them take us, Mommy, please." While the little girl clung to Zoe's coat with tiny fists, whispering, "Don't leave us, don't leave us." And Daniel stood beside them, chest rising and falling fast, adrenaline burning through his veins. One hand clenched around the folder of evidence like it was the only weapon he had in a war he never asked for. Police officers approached in a tight formation, their eyes moving from the crying children, to the terrified mother, to the guards blocking the lobby, and finally to Collins, who stiffened, straightened his jacket, and forced the same fake smile back onto his face, voice oily and rehearsed, "Officers, thank you for coming. We have a trespasser situation. This woman entered this property illegally but before he could finish, one officer raised a hand sharply, stopping him mid-sentence, and another officer stepped closer to Zoe, kneeling gently, voice calm and human, "Are you and your children safe?" And Zoe's breath cracked, her voice trembling so hard it barely formed words. They threatened to take my kids. They said we had to leave. They followed us. They tried to open my car door." And the officer's jaw tightened, eyes darkening with concern. Before Collins could interrupt, Daniel stepped forward, rain dripping down his face, voice strong but shaking. She had a rental contract. They denied her because she's a single mother. They threatened child services. And this isn't the first time. He thrust the folder into the officer's hands. The officer opened it, scanning the pages. Amanda Hayes. Eviction documents. Terminated notes. Missing report. No follow-up. Unapproved single mother. 2 children. Case closed. No further action. And the last photo, the woman crying beside her car, 6 months ago. The officer's expression changed instantly, confusion turning into shock, shock into anger. Why wasn't this reported? He demanded. Collins's voice cracked for the first time. It was an internal matter, and the officer snapped. A missing mother and children is not an internal matter. His voice powerful enough to silence the entire street, and the neighbors gasped, eyes widening as whispers rippled through the crowd. Missing. Another mother. They knew, and suddenly, every mask the HOA had ever worn began to crumble. One of the guards stepped forward, pale and shaking, whispering, "Sir, we shouldn't." But Collins rounded on him, hissing, "Silence." And that one word, sharp, panicked, cruel, echoed across the lobby like the truth he'd been hiding for years. Another officer asked, "Where is she? Where is Amanda Hayes?" And Collins swallowed hard, eyes darting, hands trembling, voice cracking. I don't know. She left. She was unstable. But his words stumbled, tripped, and died, because lies were no longer enough to hold back reality. A neighbor shouted, "We saw her crying. She begged for help." Another yelled, "You forced her out." And someone else screamed, "What did you do to her children?" Suddenly, Collins's face twisted, not into fear, but into anger, frustration, arrogance cracking through his mask, and he snapped, "Single parents destroy communities. Children without structure become problems. We were protecting everyone." And the entire street recoiled in horror as the truth finally spilled out of his mouth like poison. Zoe gasped, clutching her children even tighter, her voice breaking into a shattered whisper. "You were trying to take mine, like hers." And the little girl began sobbing uncontrollably, "Mommy, don't let him." While the boy trembled violently, tears streaking down his cheeks. Daniel stepped between them and Collins, his voice like thunder. "You don't protect the community. You prey on the vulnerable. You prey on mothers. You prey on children." At that moment, something unexpected happened. One of the guards, young, shaking, guilt etched across his face, stepped forward, eyes down, voice trembling. "I saw what happened 6 months ago. Amanda never drove away. She was escorted." The officer snapped his head up. "Escorted where?" The guard swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper, "To the old rental house. The one sealed off. The one she wasn't allowed to enter. Her kids were inside." She screamed. She begged. Then they locked the doors. She never came out. Gasps erupted everywhere. A woman from the crowd cried, "Oh my God." Someone else shouted, "Call backup." Another screamed, "Search the house." Police officers rushed toward the sealed rental property, House 14, the same house Zoe was denied earlier. Collins panicked, shouting, "You can't enter that property. It's protected. It's quarantined." But the officers ignored him, pushing past the guards, radios crackling, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Zoe watched them go, her chest heaving, tears streaming, whispering, "Please, please don't let there be more." And Daniel placed a hand gently on her back, voice soft but steady. "Whatever's in that house, it ends tonight." Minutes felt like hours as everyone waited, neighbors huddled together, guards silent, Collins pacing like a trapped animal, Zoe shaking uncontrollably, her children clinging to her as if they feared the world might rip her away then. The radio crackled. A voice came through, breathless, urgent, stunned. "We found belongings, children's clothes, toys, documents, and bones." The crowd gasped. Zoe dropped to her knees. Collins staggered backward, face drained of blood. The HOA's perfect mask shattered into dust. The officer turned toward Collins, eyes blazing, "You're under arrest." Collins stuttered, shook his head, reached out desperately. No, you don't understand, we were protecting. But two officers grabbed him, handcuffing him as he fought, screamed, thrashed. I did what was necessary. His voice echoing like a monster confessing its darkness. The neighbors erupted into shouting, rage, heartbreak, disbelief. A woman sobbed, all this time, all these years. Someone shouted, how many? Another screamed, you destroyed families. As Collins was dragged toward the police car, Zoe's little boy whispered through his tears, Mommy, are we safe? And Zoe pulled him and his sister into her arms, hugging them so tightly she could barely breathe, whispering, yes, yes, baby, we're safe, you're safe. And for the first time all night, she believed it. Daniel knelt beside them, rain still falling, but softer now, like the storm was finally ending, and Zoe looked at him through tears, not fear now, but gratitude, deep and overwhelming, and whispered, you saved us. Daniel shook his head gently, voice low, emotional. No, you saved them. I just refused to let you do it alone. The neighbors stepped closer, not with judgment now, but with support, apology, humanity. Someone offered blankets. Someone brought water. Someone called social services, not to take children, but to protect them. Zoe looked at her children, then at the dark street, then at the shattered HOA building, and whispered through trembling lips, it's over. But Daniel, looking at the file in his hand, the evidence of a pattern, the lives already lost, felt a chill run through him and whispered quietly, almost to himself, no, it's just the beginning. Because now the world will know. And as dawn flickered at the edge of the sky, washing the neighborhood in pale, honest light, one truth stood clear. The HOA didn't just fall apart tonight. Its victims finally found their voice.